Something feels off. Not just with money, not just with prices, with everything. You sign up for something and regret it later. You buy something and feel tricked. You accept a job and realize the promise wasn't real. You open an app, read the fine print, and feel like you missed something. Again. And after a while, a quiet thought starts forming in your head. Why does everything feel like a scam now? Not one big scam. Not a conspiracy with villains in a room, but a constant feeling of being nudged, squeezed, upsold, trapped, or disappointed. Like the system is smiling at you while quietly taking more than it promised. And the most unsettling part is this: you're not imagining it. This feeling didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come from negativity. It didn't come from social media poisoning your brain. It came from lived experience. Because across housing, work, healthcare, education, finance, subscriptions, tech, and even relationships with institutions, the rules quietly changed, and nobody sat you down to explain it. For decades, people were taught a simple model of how life works. You work hard, you play by the rules, you make responsible choices, and in return, things are fair enough. Not perfect, but fair. That model is gone, and what replaced it is something far more exhausting. A system where value is hidden, costs are delayed, promises are conditional, and accountability is always someone else's problem. That's why everything feels like a scam now. Not because everyone suddenly became evil, but because the incentives changed. Modern systems don't need to deliver long-term value anymore. They just need to extract short-term compliance. They don't need you to be happy. They need you to stay engaged, subscribed, paying, working, and slightly confused. Confusion is profitable. Let's start with something small, because that's how this system works. Subscriptions. At first, subscriptions felt fair. Pay a small amount. Get access. Cancel anytime. Now, free trials that require credit cards. Cancel buttons hidden 3 menus deep. Prices that quietly rise without new value. Bundles you never asked for. Features removed unless you upgrade again. You're not paying for improvement. You're paying to avoid losing what you already had. That's not a product model. That's a hostage model. And it works because it's subtle. Individually, none of it feels outrageous. Collectively, it feels suffocating. That same pattern exists everywhere else. Jobs promise flexibility, then demand availability. Careers promise growth, then cap wages. Degrees promise opportunity, then deliver debt. Credit promises freedom, then creates dependency. Each system makes sense on its own. Each one has plausible explanations. Each one has fine print. But when you live inside all of them at once, something becomes impossible to ignore. You're always adjusting, always compensating, always paying more for less clarity. That constant adjustment is the scam, not in the criminal sense, in the structural sense. A scam doesn't always steal from you outright. Sometimes it just slowly shifts the deal after you've already agreed. Think about how many times you've heard some version of this sentence: well, technically, we never promised that. Technically. Technically, the rent increase is allowed. Technically, the interest rate can change. Technically, the benefits were never guaranteed. Technically, the terms were updated. Technically, it's in the contract. The word technically has become the shield behind which trust dies. Because when everything is technically correct but emotionally wrong, people stop believing in the system. They stop trusting outcomes. They stop trusting institutions. They stop trusting each other. And that's when life starts to feel like one long negotiation where you're always at a disadvantage. This is why people feel tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. It's not physical exhaustion. It's cognitive exhaustion. Every decision now comes with homework. Is this price real? Is this deal temporary? Is this a trap? What happens later? What am I missing? When basic participation in society requires constant vigilance, the system is no longer serving people. It's testing them. And most people don't fail because they're careless. They fail because the complexity is intentional. Complexity protects extraction. If something is too confusing to fully understand, responsibility shifts to the individual. You should have read more. You should have known better. You should have planned. But when millions of people are making the same mistakes, it's not a personal failure. It's a design feature. Look at healthcare. Insurance plans that look affordable until you use them. Networks that change without notice. Deductibles that reset. Coverage that disappears when you need it most. You're technically insured. You're practically exposed. That gap between technical coverage and real protection is where the scam feeling lives. The same thing happened to education. Degrees were sold as investments. Loans were framed as temporary sacrifices. Careers were supposed to follow. Instead, people graduated into instability, stagnant wages, and debt that outlived the degree itself. Again, technically nothing illegal happened. But something deeply dishonest did. The promise changed after the commitment. And that pattern repeated itself so many times that people stopped believing new promises altogether. That's why optimism feels risky now. It's safer to assume disappointment. It's safer to expect hidden costs. It's safer to stay skeptical. Not because people are cynical, but because cynicism has become adaptive. When you've been burned enough times, distrust feels like intelligence. And here's the part most people haven't articulated yet. This environment doesn't just drain money, it drains meaning. When everything feels transactional, nothing feels solid. When every system feels like it's trying to outsmart you, you stop relaxing into life. You stop believing that effort leads to stability. You stop believing that loyalty is rewarded. You stop believing that the future is something you're building, instead of something you're surviving. That shift changes people. It makes them guarded, short-term focused, emotionally defensive. Not because they want to be, but because the system trained them to be. And that's the real danger. A society where everything feels like a scam doesn't just lose trust in institutions. It loses trust in the idea that things can work at all. People don't disengage because they're lazy. They disengage because they feel played. And once that feeling sets in, it spreads fast. Because it doesn't require ideology, it doesn't require politics, it doesn't require explanation. All it requires is experience. And almost everyone has it now. To understand why everything feels like a scam now, you have to stop asking, who is lying? And start asking a different question. What is being rewarded? Because systems don't become predatory because people wake up evil one day. They become predatory when the rules quietly reward extraction over value. And over the last few decades, that's exactly what happened. Most modern systems are no longer built to serve you long-term. They're built to show growth on paper. Fast, measurable, repeatable growth. Quarterly growth. Monthly growth. Daily engagement growth. Not human stability. Not trust. Not durability. Metrics replaced meaning. And once that happens, the product doesn't need to be good. It just needs to keep you inside. This is where the scam feeling begins. Take technology. Apps used to be tools. Now they're funnels. You don't open an app to do something. You open it to be nudged. Notifications, badges, streaks, limited time offers, artificial urgency. None of that exists to help you. It exists to increase time spent and retention. Because attention is monetizable. And when attention becomes the product, honesty becomes optional. You're not misusing the app. The app is using you, exactly as designed. The same logic spread into finance. Credit cards stopped being emergency tools. They became lifestyle bridges. Buy now, pay later. Minimum payment due. Just $29 a month. The real cost is never front and center, because friction kills conversion. So instead of clarity, you get comfort. Instead of truth, you get reassurance. And by the time the real cost shows up, you're already locked in. That's not an accident. That's a funnel. Housing followed the same path. Homes stopped being places to live. They became assets. And once housing becomes an investment vehicle, the incentives flip. High prices are good. Scarcity is good. Turnover is bad. Affordability is irrelevant. Rent rises not because value increased, but because demand can absorb it. Ownership disappears, not because people don't want it, but because leverage beats shelter in the system's logic. You're not priced out because you failed. You're priced out because the system rewards whoever extracts the most rent, not whoever provides the most stability. Again, technically legal, emotionally devastating. Work changed too. Jobs used to exchange time for security. Now they exchange availability for uncertainty. Flexible schedules that mean always reachable. Performance metrics that constantly shift. Titles without power. Raises that don't beat inflation. You're told to be grateful, to be adaptable, to hustle. But adaptability is just another word for absorbing risk that used to belong to institutions. Risk moved downward. Rewards moved upward. That's not coincidence. That's design. This is why everything feels transactional now. Because it is. Healthcare, education, insurance, employment, all run on the same logic. Minimize upfront resistance. Maximize long-term extraction. Externalize consequences. If something breaks, it's your fault. If something costs more, adjust. If something fails, read the fine print. The system never apologizes. It updates its terms. And this is where the emotional damage really begins. Because humans are wired for fairness, not optimization. We can handle sacrifice if it feels shared. We can handle effort if it leads somewhere. We can handle rules if they're consistent. But modern systems aren't consistent. They're asymmetrical. They protect themselves first. They penalize you for reacting. Miss a payment? Fees. Try to cancel? Friction. Need help? Automation. Complain? Policy. Everything is technically correct. Nothing feels just. Over time, people stop feeling like participants. They feel like targets. And once you feel targeted, trust evaporates. You stop believing ads. You stop believing promises. You stop believing institutions are neutral. You assume there's a catch, because there usually is. That assumption isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. This is why the phrase, read the fine print, has become meaningless. No one has time to audit every interaction just to survive. A system that requires constant suspicion is not functional. It's adversarial. And adversarial systems produce one dominant emotion, fatigue. Not anger, not fear. Fatigue. Decision fatigue. Moral fatigue. Hope fatigue. People aren't disengaging because they don't care. They're disengaging because caring has become expensive, emotionally expensive, mentally expensive, financially expensive. Every deal asks you to be alert. Every opportunity asks you to verify. Every offer asks you to defend yourself. That's not living. That's managing exposure. And the most dangerous part is how normal this has become. When younger generations say, everything feels like a scam, older generations often hear bitterness. But it's not bitterness. It's calibration. They grew up watching systems say one thing and do another. They watched rules change mid-game. They watched institutions fail upward. So they learned early, trust is a liability. That lesson doesn't create lazy people. It creates cautious ones. People who delay commitments. People who avoid risk. People who disengage emotionally from systems they don't believe in. And then those same systems complain about a lack of loyalty. But loyalty requires belief. Belief requires consistency. Consistency requires restraint. And restraint is bad for quarterly numbers. So instead, the system keeps squeezing. It adds complexity instead of clarity. It adds fees instead of value. It adds pressure instead of stability, because it can. For now. But here's the thing most systems ignore. A population that feels scammed doesn't revolt immediately. It withdraws. It stops dreaming. It stops planning. It stops trusting. And that withdrawal shows up everywhere. In relationships, in work, in politics, in mental health. People don't feel hopeful anymore. They feel managed. And no amount of branding can fix that. When everything feels like a scam, the damage doesn't stop at money. It goes deeper. Because trust isn't just an abstract idea, it's a psychological foundation. When people trust systems, they plan, they commit, they invest effort into the future. When they don't, something changes. They become cautious, defensive, short-term focused, not because they're pessimistic, but because optimism stopped paying off. This is the part no spreadsheet measures. A world that feels scam-like creates people who feel permanently on guard. Every decision becomes provisional. Every promise feels suspicious. Every commitment feels risky. You don't move forward confidently. You inch forward carefully. And that constant vigilance is exhausting. This is why so many people say they feel tired all the time, even when their life doesn't look objectively terrible. They're not physically overworked. They're psychologically overloaded. They're constantly scanning for traps. Is this job stable? Is this price real? Is this relationship transactional? Is this policy going to change? Is this benefit temporary? When trust disappears, uncertainty fills the gap, and uncertainty demands energy. Over time, people adapt to this environment in ways that look like apathy from the outside. They stop caring about long-term goals. They delay big life decisions. They avoid responsibility not because they're immature, but because responsibility no longer comes with protection. Why commit to a system that can change the rules overnight? Why invest emotionally when everything feels conditional? Why believe promises when experience taught you they expire? This is where the scam feeling becomes dangerous, because it doesn't just make people angry, it makes them disengage. Disengagement looks like laziness to institutions, but it feels like self-preservation to individuals. When systems feel adversarial, people don't give their best. They give their minimum effort, minimum trust, minimum exposure. Sound familiar? It's the same logic as minimum payments. Do just enough to avoid punishment, never enough to feel safe. That mindset spreads quietly. People stop going above and beyond. They stop identifying with their work. They stop believing loyalty matters. They do what's required, and nothing more. Not because they don't care, because caring has become risky. This is why burnout is everywhere. Burnout isn't just working too much. It's working inside a system that keeps asking for faith without offering security. It's being told to bring your whole self while knowing you're replaceable. It's being told to invest in yourself while watching institutions offload risk onto you. It's being told this is temporary for years. Eventually, the brain protects itself. It numbs. That numbness is often mistaken for depression or lack of motivation. But very often, it's rational withdrawal. A person who feels scammed doesn't stop functioning. They stop believing. And belief is what makes effort meaningful. This is why people feel disconnected from work, from institutions, even from society itself. They don't feel like participants anymore. They feel like customers. Or worse, revenue streams. And customers don't feel loyalty. They feel calculation. What's in it for me? What's the catch? What happens if I leave? Those are not immoral questions. They're adaptive ones. The tragedy is that this mindset wasn't chosen. It was taught. It was taught by experiences where the fine print mattered more than the promise. By systems that optimized revenue at the expense of trust. By institutions that protected themselves first and asked individuals to adjust. So when people say, everything feels like a scam now, what they're really saying is, I don't feel protected anymore. Protection used to be implicit. Now it's optional and expensive. Insurance protects on paper. Jobs protect conditionally. Savings protect temporarily. Rules protect selectively. And when protection disappears, people become cautious by necessity. They stop dreaming big. They stop expecting fairness. They stop believing effort will be met halfway. That loss is invisible, but it's massive. Because societies don't collapse when people are angry. They erode when people stop caring. A population that feels scammed doesn't riot first. It disengages. It delays family formation. It delays home ownership. It delays commitment. It delays hope. Not because people are broken, but because trust was. This is the emotional cost of extraction-based systems. They don't just move money upward, they move confidence downward. And confidence is harder to rebuild than wealth. The scariest part isn't that people are cynical, it's that cynicism is now reasonable. When skepticism becomes the default, optimism looks naive. When caution becomes wisdom, trust looks foolish. That shift doesn't make people worse. It makes systems fragile. Because systems depend on belief. Belief that rules are stable. Belief that effort matters. Belief that participation is worth it. Once that belief cracks, no amount of branding can fix it. You can't market trust back into existence. You have to earn it. And that's where the story is heading. Because the feeling that everything is a scam is not a phase. It's feedback. And systems that ignore feedback eventually face consequences. Realizing why everything feels like a scam doesn't mean you suddenly see enemies everywhere. It doesn't mean paranoia. It doesn't mean giving up. And it doesn't mean rejecting every system you interact with. It means something much simpler. It means you stop blaming yourself for reacting honestly to an environment that quietly changed. For a long time, people were told that discomfort was a personal problem. If you felt anxious, you weren't planning well enough. If you felt tired, you weren't managing time correctly. If you felt disappointed, your expectations were wrong. But what if your reactions were never irrational? What if feeling suspicious was your mind doing exactly what it's supposed to do when patterns stop making sense? Because the truth is, most people didn't become cynical overnight. They became observant. They noticed that promises kept shrinking, that risks kept moving downward, that responsibility became individual while protection became conditional. They noticed that systems demanded trust but didn't return it, and eventually they adjusted. That adjustment is often mislabeled as negativity, but it's closer to awareness. Awareness doesn't make life easier immediately, but it makes it clearer. You stop chasing explanations that blame your character. You stop internalizing failures that were baked into the structure. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What exactly am I participating in?" That shift matters. Because people who see the system clearly behave differently. They're less reactive, less shame-driven, less easily manipulated by urgency and fear. They don't confuse complexity with intelligence. They don't confuse fine print with fairness. They don't confuse technically allowed with actually right. They still participate, because most of us have to, but they do it with their eyes open. And that's the part systems built on confusion struggle with. Confusion creates compliance. Clarity creates limits. When you understand why everything feels like a scam, you stop expecting trust from places that never earned it. You stop overinvesting emotionally where incentives are misaligned. You stop giving loyalty to structures that treat you as a variable instead of a person. That doesn't make you bitter, it makes you precise. Precision is dangerous to extraction-based systems. Because extraction depends on fog. Fog around prices. Fog around consequences. Fog around responsibility. Once the fog lifts, even slightly, people start making different choices. They read contracts differently. They hear promises differently. They feel pressure differently. They don't panic, but they don't relax blindly either. And perhaps most importantly, they stop feeling alone. Because once you name the pattern, you realize how many others feel it too. That quiet thought, why does everything feel like a scam now, is not a personal failing. It's a shared realization. A realization that spreads not through ideology, but through experience. And that's why it's so powerful. This isn't about predicting collapse. It's about understanding the present. A present where systems optimized for growth forgot the cost of trust. A present where efficiency replaced stability. A present where people are asked to carry uncertainty alone. Seeing that clearly doesn't fix everything, but it gives you something essential back. Orientation. You know where the pressure is coming from. You know why certain choices feel heavier than they used to. You know why disengagement feels tempting, and why it's happening everywhere at once. And once you're oriented, you're no longer just reacting, you're choosing. If this video put words to something you've been feeling but never fully articulated, say something in the comments. Not to argue, not to vent, just to acknowledge it. Because the fastest way confusion keeps working is by convincing people they're the only ones who see it. And they're not. The feeling that everything is a scam isn't hysteria. It's feedback. And systems that ignore feedback don't stay stable forever. They just stay loud until people stop listening.